The mountain man's dream. Elias, his calloused hands absently stroking the rough-hewn pine of his new porch railing, watched the last sliver of sun dip behind the western ridge. The air, crisp and hinting at the coming night, carried the scent of pine and damp earth. His new cabin, a sturdy testament to his life savings, stood silent and empty behind him. Or, it was supposed to be empty. A tremor of unease, a feeling he'd been trying to ignore since discovering the 10 pairs of wide, dark eyes staring back at him from his own hearth, prickled at the back of his neck. He'd bought this land for solitude, for the quiet embrace of the mountains, not for an unexpected sisterhood of Cherokee women. He still saw their faces, a blend of fear and desperate hope, as they pleaded, "Please let us stay here." The crackle of a small fire from within the cabin pulled him from his reverie. He'd left them with a modest amount of kindling and the promise to return, a promise he now found himself dreading. He pushed open the door, the hinges groaning softly in the twilight. The single lantern he'd lit earlier cast long, dancing shadows across the room, illuminating the women clustered near the stone fireplace. They were younger than he'd initially thought, some barely out of girlhood, their traditional dresses a stark contrast to the rough interior of his cabin. "Evening," Elias rumbled, his voice deeper than usual in the confined space. 10 pairs of eyes, dark as obsidian, fixed on him. A nervous silence descended, broken only by the gentle hiss of the fire. One of them, a woman with striking cheekbones and a thoughtful gaze he recognized as the one who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. "Thank you for the fire, Elias." Her voice was soft, melodic, like water over stones. "We kept it small." He nodded, his gaze sweeping over them. "You'll need more wood eventually. And food." He gestured to the nearly empty larder. "This isn't a charity." He hadn't meant for it to sound so harsh, but the reality of his situation was setting in. 10 mouths to feed, 10 bodies to shelter, in a cabin he'd scraped and saved for. Another woman, younger, with braids woven with colorful beads, spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "We can work, sir. We are not idle." Elias sighed, running a hand over his beard. "Work for what? There's no gold mine here, no trading post within a day's ride. Just mountains." He paused, then softened his tone. "Look, I don't understand why you're here. Why my cabin?" The first woman, the thoughtful one, met his gaze unflinchingly. "We are seeking refuge. From a difficult situation. This place, it was known to us. A place of peace, we believed. We did not know it had been sold. A flicker of something, regret? Sorrow? Crossed her face. We would not impose, if we had other options." The sincerity in her voice, in all their silent pleas, chipped away at his resolve. He wasn't a cruel man, merely a solitary one. And a practical one. "How long are you planning to stay?" A nervous glance passed between the women. The thoughtful one, whose name he still didn't know, hesitated. "Until it is safe for us to return. Or to find a new home." He exhaled slowly. "And where is that, exactly?" She shook her head. "We cannot say. It is dangerous." Elias felt a surge of frustration, then a grudging understanding. This wasn't some simple misunderstanding. This was a deeper trouble, one that had driven them to seek shelter in a remote cabin. He looked at their faces again, saw not just fear, but resilience. And a quiet strength that resonated with something in his own soul. "All right," he said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "For tonight, you stay. But tomorrow, we talk. Properly. About how this is going to work. Because this is my home, and I won't have it overrun." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And my name is Elias." The thoughtful woman smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that transformed her face. "I am Alara. And we are grateful, Elias." He nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through him. The mountain man's dream of solitude was irrevocably altered, but perhaps, just perhaps, it had changed into something even more profound. He stepped out into the night, the vastness of the mountains no longer feeling quite so empty. A hidden gem. Elias squinted at the brittle, faded map, parchment crackling beneath his calloused thumb. It reads, "Follow the twin pines past the split rock, then due north till the river bends like a serpent's coil." More like a riddle than directions. 10 pairs of dark eyes, belonging to his unforeseen entourage, tracked the intricate lines. Little Willow, the youngest, pointed a delicate finger. "Mr. Elias, the split rock is behind us. We passed it yesterday." A flush crept up Elias's neck. His singular focus on a solitary future had blinded him to the present journey. Now, with this literal retinue, his aspirations for quiet contemplation were as shattered as the landmark they'd overshot. He grumbled, but a spark of amusement flickered in his gaze. "Well, I suppose that means we're on the right track, then." "Just a little beyond the right track." They pressed on for another half-day, the sun climbing higher, scorching the dusty path. The air thrummed with the unseen symphony of insects, and the sharp scent of pine needles blended with the earthier aroma of sagebrush. Elias, ever watchful, scanned the horizon, his rifle held easily. He'd witnessed enough peril in these mountains. The thought of these girls facing it alone sent a cold tremor through him. Finally, as the sun began its slow decline, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, the serpentine twist of the river appeared. And cradled in that bend, almost engulfed by the dense forest, was a cabin. This was no rough-hewn shack he'd envisioned. This was a meticulously kept structure of dark timber, a slender wisp of smoke curling from its stone chimney. A small, cleared plot of land encircled it, neatly fenced, boasting what appeared to be a nascent garden. This can't be it," Elias murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. "My deed specified a one-room cabin, barely standing." As they drew nearer, a figure emerged, a woman with hair like polished obsidian, carrying a basket heaped with freshly picked berries. Her eyes, wide with surprise, met Elias's. Then, a slow smile blossomed, revealing teeth as bright as mountain snow. "Welcome, traveler," she said, her voice soft yet resonant. "We didn't anticipate company so soon." Elias felt a familiar blush creep up his neck. "My name's Elias Vance. And according to this deed," he pulled the crumpled paper from his buckskin pouch, "this here cabin is mine. Bought it from a fellow named Silas." The woman's smile faltered, a shadow passing over her features. "Silas, he left many months ago. Said he was going to the Great Plains, to hunt buffalo." She looked at the girls, then back at Elias, a thoughtful expression on her face. "But this cabin, it has always been home to my family." A tense quiet descended, broken only by the chirping of crickets. The other girls, seeing the woman, had drawn closer, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was far more intricate than a simple misunderstanding. He looked from the woman to the deed, then back to the carefully tended garden. This was no abandoned shack, and these were no squatters. This was a home. "Perhaps," Elias began, choosing his words with care, "we should all sit and talk. There's clearly been a mistake." The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "There has. But the sun is setting, and the mountains are not safe after dark. You are welcome to our fire tonight." She gestured towards the cabin, a silent invitation that carried the weight of generations. Elias, with his 10 unexpected charges, knew he had little choice. The hidden gem, it seemed, was already claimed. An unexpected welcome. The scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something unexpectedly sweet, perhaps simmering berries, filled Jedediah's nostrils as he pushed open the creaking door of his newly acquired mountain shack. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight piercing the grimy windows, illuminating a scene that stole the breath from his lungs. 10 pairs of wide, dark eyes, like polished obsidian, stared back at him from various corners of the single room. These weren't the grizzled trappers or solitary prospectors he'd expected to find, but young women, each with intricate beadwork woven into their dark hair and the vibrant patterns of Cherokee clothing adorning them. They huddled together, some behind an overturned table, others pressed against the stone fireplace, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. Jedediah, still holding the deed to the property, felt his jaw slacken. "Well, I'll be a whole nest of partridges," he mumbled, his voice rougher than he intended. He set his rifle down with a thud that made several of them flinch. A young woman, no older than 18, with a delicate scar tracing her left eyebrow, stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected strength. "Please, sir. We mean no harm. We thought this place was abandoned." Her eyes, though still wary, held a plea that tugged at something deep within Jedediah. Abandoned? Jedediah scoffed, though the anger was quickly dissolving into bewildered amusement. "I just bought this place, girl. Got the papers right here. Jedediah Stone is my name, and this here is my home." He gestured vaguely around the cramped space, still trying to reconcile the image of his solitary mountain life with this sudden, unexpected influx of humanity. Another girl, taller and with a more regal bearing, emerged from behind the fireplace. "We are of the Ani-Yunwia," she stated, her chin held high. "We seek refuge. Our elders sent us ahead." Her gaze held a desperate intensity. "The soldiers, they are moving us. We have nowhere else to go." The full weight of their plight settled upon Jedediah. The whispers of forced removal, the trail of tears as some called it, had reached even his remote corner of the mountains. He looked at their frightened faces, their weary postures, and the spark of protective instinct, long dormant, ignited within him. His mountain shack, meant for one, suddenly felt too small, yet impossibly vast. He ran a hand through his grizzled beard. "Refuge, eh?" He sighed, the sound a gusty expulsion of air. "Well, I reckon a man's home is his castle, even if that castle ain't much more than a pile of logs. And I reckon a man's castle ain't much good if it can't shelter those in need." He looked at the first girl, the one with the scar. "What's your name, child?" "Ayanna, sir," she replied, a glimmer of hope entering her eyes. Jedediah nodded slowly. "Ayanna. All right, Ayanna. And the rest of you? I don't know what kind of welcome this is, but it's the only one I got. So, tell me, do any of you know how to cook a decent meal? Because I'm starved, and this place could use a good airing out." A ripple of quiet murmurs, followed by a tentative smile from Ayanna, spread through the room. The tension, thick as mountain fog, began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, unexpected calm. A plea for shelter. A banshee's shriek, the wind clawed at the cabin's chinking, a mocking counterpoint to Jedediah's solitary sigh. He'd barely begun to offload provisions from his packhorse when a soft, almost imperceptible scritch at the door snagged his attention. He froze, hands suspended above a tin of coffee. Bears didn't scratch like that. Wolves certainly didn't. Drawing his Colt, its familiar weight a cold anchor, he peered through a narrow slit in the heavy oak. His breath hitched. 10 pairs of wide, dark eyes stared back, framed by the frayed edges of buckskin and woven wool. Young women, scarcely more than girls, huddled on his porch, their faces streaked with dried tears and smudged with trail dust. Jedediah slowly unlatched the door, his gaze sweeping over them. They flinched, like startled deer, yet held their ground. The eldest, a girl with braided hair adorned with feathers and a resolute jawline, stepped forward. "Please, sir," her voice a breathy whisper, barely audible above the wind's howl, "we mean no harm. We only seek shelter." He surveyed the group, noting their threadbare clothing, the chattering of their teeth, the way they clutched their meager bundles. Cherokee, clearly, and clearly in dire straits. His mind raced. This wasn't a lone drifter, this was an entire cohort. "Shelter from what?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gruff. The girl hesitated, a silent communion passing between her and her companions. From the soldiers," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a murmur. They come for us. We ran." Jedediah's jaw tightened. He'd heard the rumors, the dark whispers of forced removals, but to see its victims on his very doorstep. His new cabin, his hard-won sanctuary, was suddenly a moral crucible. He thought of the long journey, the sweat and toil to claim this patch of earth, this peace. He thought of his own solitude, his yearning for a quiet life. "There are 10 of you," he stated, his words clipped. "This cabin, it's small." Another girl, younger, with wide, pleading eyes, tugged at the eldest's sleeve. "Please, sir," she whimpered, "it is so cold. We have nowhere else to go." Jedediah looked out at the darkening sky, the promise of a truly brutal night hanging heavy in the air. A familiar ache stirred in his chest, a ghost of his own past loneliness. He knew what it was to be adrift, to be utterly unmoored. He looked at the faces, etched with fear and desperation, and a decision solidified. His solitude could wait. He stepped back, widening the door. "Come in," he said, his voice softening. "But be quick. This door's letting all the heat out." A collective exhalation of relief filled the air as they shuffled inside, their small frames huddling together for warmth. The cabin, once a haven of quiet, was now filled with the soft rustle of their clothes, the murmur of hushed whispers, and the undeniable presence of 10 desperate souls. Jedediah watched them, a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent, unfamiliar warmth kindling within him. His new life had just taken an unforeseen turn. A shared home. The scent of pine resin and drying herbs hung heavy in the air, a comforting, wild perfume that permeated every corner of the cabin. Jedediah, standing in the doorway with a freshly cut armload of firewood, paused, watching the scene unfold within. Sunlight, fractured by the small, grimy windowpanes, dappled across the rough-hewn floorboards, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden beams. At the large, central hearth, Ilara, the eldest of the Cherokee women, was stirring a pot of something fragrant and bubbling, her movements precise and unhurried. Her long, dark braids swayed gently with each stir. Near her, Willow and Ember were meticulously braiding sweetgrass, their fingers nimble and quick, the soft rustle of the dried stalks the only sound besides the gentle hiss of the fire. The youngest, Wren, was perched on a stool, diligently polishing a tarnished copper pot, her brow furrowed in concentration. It had been nearly a week since Jedediah had stumbled upon them, a week since their desperate plea had echoed in his new home. The initial shock had given way to a strange, tentative truce, then to a quiet understanding. He still felt a pang of disbelief occasionally, seeing the cabin, which he'd envisioned as his solitary retreat, now teeming with life, with laughter, with the quiet murmur of women's voices. "Smells good, Ilara," he rumbled, finally stepping inside and depositing the firewood with a soft thud beside the hearth. Ilara turned, a small, knowing smile gracing her lips. "Stew. We found some wild carrots and onions down by the creek bed." Her gaze met his, steady and appraising. "You look less troubled than a few days ago, Jedediah." He grunted, a short, noncommittal sound that nevertheless acknowledged the truth of her observation. The tension that had coiled in his gut for weeks, the lingering grief for his lost family, the gnawing loneliness of the frontier, had begun to loosen its grip. The cabin, once a symbol of his solitary existence, now felt less like a tomb and more like a vibrant, if chaotic, sanctuary. "It's different," he admitted, rubbing a hand across his beard. He watched as Wren, finished with her polishing, proudly held up the gleaming pot for Willow's inspection. A soft murmur of approval passed between them. He cleared his throat. "I was thinking about that back room. The one I used for storage. It's got a decent roof, just needs a good sweep and maybe some fresh straw for beds. You all could have some more space." A hush fell over the room. Ilara's stirring ceased. The braiding stopped. 10 pairs of eyes, ranging from the deep, thoughtful brown of Ilara to the sparkling, curious gaze of Ren, turned to him. The air thrummed with a sudden, unexpected anticipation. You would do that?" Ember whispered, her voice barely audible. Jedediah felt a warmth spread through him, a sensation unfamiliar and welcome. "It's your home too, now, isn't it?" he said, his voice gruffer than he intended, but laced with an uncharacteristic softness. "Seems only right you have some proper room to stretch out." A wave of smiles, tentative at first, then blossoming into genuine joy, swept through the room. Ren let out a little squeal of delight, dropping the copper pot with a clang. Ilara's smile deepened, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Jedediah," she said, her voice rich with sincerity. "That would be a great kindness." He merely nodded, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. The smell of the stew, of pine, of sweetgrass, suddenly felt like home. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone in it. Weeks of discovery. The weeks that followed were a blur of shared meals, whispered conversations, and a constant, delicate dance of boundaries and burgeoning trust. Elias, initially unsettled by the 10 unexpected residents, found himself slowly but surely adapting to the lively hum that now filled his cabin. He learned their names: Ayana, Tala, Ani, Salali, Sulla, Oconee, Nanyehi, Aili, Adai, and Sequoia, each one a melodic whisper on the wind. His days, once solitary and predictable, now revolved around more than just trapping and hunting. He'd wake to the scent of wood smoke and brewing sassafras tea, a stark contrast to the bitter coffee he'd grown accustomed to. Ayana, the eldest and most outwardly assertive, often took charge of the morning preparations, her movements efficient and graceful. Elias watched her, fascinated by the quiet authority she wielded amongst her sisters. He'd find himself lingering over his breakfast of corn cakes and dried venison, listening to their soft chatter, a language he didn't understand but found oddly comforting. The cabin, once sparsely furnished, began to feel lived in, imbued with their presence. They moved with a lightness that belied their numbers, somehow managing to keep their living spaces tidy despite the cramped conditions. Elias allocated the smaller bedroom to them, giving them what little privacy he could. He often found them gathered there, braiding each other's hair, sharing stories in hushed tones, or mending clothes with nimble fingers. He never intruded, respecting the feminine space they had carved out for themselves. One afternoon, while Elias was mending a trap by the river, he heard a sudden shriek, followed by a splash. His heart leaped into his throat. Dropping his tools, he sprinted towards the sound, imagining a bear, or worse. He burst through the foliage to find Salali, the youngest, giggling uncontrollably as Aili, slightly older, tried to dunk her head under the icy water of the stream. They were playing, their laughter echoing through the trees, a sound Elias hadn't realized he'd missed. He watched them for a long moment, a smile slowly spreading across his rugged face. The harsh edges of his isolation were softening, chipped away by these unexpected moments of joy. The most challenging, and perhaps most rewarding, discovery was the girls' insistence on contributing. They were not simply guests, they were an integral part of the household. They knew the forest intimately, showing Elias edible berries he'd overlooked, pointing out medicinal herbs he'd never recognized. Tala, with her keen eyes, often spotted game before he did, her quiet alerts proving invaluable. Ani and Sulla, surprisingly strong for their build, helped him gather firewood, their small hands surprisingly adept with an axe. One evening, as the fire cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Ayana approached him. "Elias," she began, her voice soft but firm, "we wish to repay your kindness. We can weave baskets, prepare pelts. We are not idle." Her directness, while slightly jarring, was also deeply earnest. Elias, who had always prided himself on self-sufficiency, found himself nodding. Their desire to contribute wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity, about asserting their place. He realized then that this was no longer just his cabin. It was their home, too. The arrangement, born of desperation, was slowly, irrevocably, transforming into something far more profound. Whispers by the fire. The fire, a riot of orange against the darkening sky, sent lively shadows dancing across their faces. Elias, lost in thought, prodded the embers with a long stick, releasing a cascade of sparks into the crisp evening. The rich scent of venison, mingled with the sharp sweetness of pine, hung heavy and comforting. "Excellent," he murmured, gesturing towards the pot. "Truly excellent." Lily's braids, catching the fire's glow, framed a shy smile. "We make do with what we have, Elias." Her sisters, a quiet arc around the flames, hummed their assent. A noticeable shift had occurred tonight, a softening of the careful distance that had marked their initial wary cohabitation. Weeks had unfolded since then, filled with shared tasks, murmured conversations, and a deepening, unspoken accord. "You know," Elias began, his voice low, "the snows will descend before long. Deeper than last year, if the signs hold true." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "This cabin, it's not truly built for so many through a harsh winter." A tremor of unease rippled through the young women. Their dark, expressive eyes darted from Elias to each other. Willow, ever the most forthright, broke the silence. "We can manage. We always have." "Perhaps," Elias conceded, "but it won't be simple. And there's more than just the cold to contend with." He fixed his gaze on Willow, then swept it over the others. "The U.S. Army patrols have been pushing further west. They're looking for anyone not accounted for." The fire's warmth suddenly felt inadequate, replaced by a cold dread. The girls understood the implication. Forced migrations, treaties shattered, their lineage bore the indelible marks of such history. To be on the rolls meant documentation, categorization, and ultimately, displacement. "We've remained hidden for years," Ivy, the quietest, finally whispered. "No one knows we're here." "That's true," Elias agreed, "but this cabin, it's recognized. It was mine, before I left. People back east, they remember." He sighed, raking a hand through his beard. "If they come looking for me, they'll find you." Silence descended, punctuated only by crickets and the occasional pop of the fire. The once cheery glow now seemed to illuminate their perilous situation rather than conceal it. Then, Lily, her voice a mere whisper but imbued with resolve, spoke. "We can't return. There's nothing for us there. And nowhere else to go." Her wide, earnest eyes met Elias's. "Please, Elias. Let us stay. We'll assist. We'll cause no trouble." Her sisters echoed the plea with a soft chorus of murmurs and nods. The raw desperation in their gaze, a vulnerability laid bare, plucked at a deep chord within Elias. He regarded each of them, observing the struggle between fear and hope in their expressions. He had sought solitude here, a new start. He had found something far more intricate, far more compelling. He looked back at the fire, at the swirling embers painting fleeting images in the air. The risk was undeniable, for all of them. But the alternative, to cast them out into the wilds, into the path of an unyielding government, felt utterly wrong. He recalled the feel of their calloused hands helping him mend the roof, the way their laughter had, for the first time in years, filled his solitary home. "All right," Elias said, his voice gruff, yet imbued with a surprising tenderness. He met Lily's gaze, a faint smile playing on his lips. "All right, you can stay. But we'll need to be smart. We'll need a plan." The mountain's fury. The wind, a banshee wail through the crags, ripped at Elias's buckskins. Snow, fine as dust then thick as cotton, swirled in a dizzying vortex around the crude mountain shack. Inside, the single lantern cast a flickering, inadequate glow against the looming shadows. Outside, the mountain was a living, breathing beast, and its fury was upon them. "It's getting worse," Willow murmured, her voice barely audible above the storm's shriek. She stood by the small, grimy window, a hand pressed against the cold pane, her silhouette framed by the swirling white. "I've never seen a blizzard this strong, not this early in the season." Elias wrestled a heavy log into the stone fireplace, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "The old-timers talked about these white-outs," he grunted, wiping a smear of soot from his cheek. "Said they'd swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful." He glanced at the huddled forms of the other girls, their faces etched with a mix of fear and grim determination. Little Wren, the youngest, clung to Blossom's skirt, her eyes wide. Suddenly, a violent gust rattled the shack's flimsy door, making the entire structure groan. A crack appeared in the wall near the window, a jagged line stretching across the rough-hewn timbers. Willow gasped, stepping back as a thin tendril of snow snaked inward. "The roof!" Raven cried out, pointing upwards. A deep thud echoed, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. A section of the ceiling sagged ominously, showering them with dust and flakes of ancient moss. "We need to reinforce that wall," Elias said, his voice firm, cutting through the rising panic. "And the door. It won't hold much longer." He looked at the girls, his gaze assessing. "Who can help me gather some of these spare timbers?" Without a moment's hesitation, Aspen and Lily stepped forward. Aspen, always practical, began stacking loose logs, while Lily, despite her usually gentle demeanor, demonstrated surprising strength in dragging a heavy beam. The other girls, though frightened, followed suit, their movements swift and coordinated. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each understanding their role, their fear transmuted into purposeful action. As Elias braced a beam against the groaning wall, the wind howled louder, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Then came a sickening crunch from the rear of the shack, followed by a rush of icy air. "The lean-to!" Meadow exclaimed, her voice tight with despair. "It's gone!" Elias cursed under his breath. The lean-to held their precious stores of dried meat and berries, provisions they desperately needed to survive the winter. He pushed harder against the beam, sweat beading on his brow despite the freezing temperatures. "We can't go out there now. It's too dangerous." He looked at Willow, their eyes meeting across the chaotic scene. Her gaze was resolute, a fierce spark in the dim light. "We'll make do, Elias," she said, her voice a balm against the storm's fury. "We always do." The mountain raged, but within the tiny shack, a new kind of strength was forging, a unity born of shared peril. Elias felt a profound shift, not just in the weather, but in his own understanding. This wasn't just his shack anymore. It was their sanctuary, and they would defend it together. He tightened his grip on the timber, his resolve hardening with every gust of wind. A forever home. The familiar aroma of pine resin and damp earth, Elias's constant companion, now intertwined with a curious sweetness, almost floral, clinging to the cabin air. He paused in the doorway, sunbeams slicing through the afternoon gloom, illuminating a ballet of dust motes. 10 pairs of eyes, a spectrum from wary apprehension to fragile hope, fixed on him. The girls clustered in the main room, some perched on crude benches, others standing by the large stone hearth, hands clasped tight. We didn't mean any harm, mister," the eldest, Nanyehi, spoke, her voice a soft rustle like autumn leaves. Dark braids framed a face graced with eyes that seemed to have witnessed generations. We had nowhere else to go." Elias sighed, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. His gaze swept over their young, vulnerable faces, then across the cabin he'd painstakingly built. It was modest, a sturdy log structure, 2 rooms, a lean-to kitchen, but it was his. Or, it had been his. He ran a calloused hand over his beard. "Nowhere at all?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Another girl, younger, with bright, inquisitive eyes, edged forward. Our village, it's gone. The soldiers, they made everyone leave. We got separated. A collective shiver rippled through the group. The tale was tragically common, whispers carried on the wind, smoke plumes on the horizon, Elias knew. His heart, usually a stoic, solitary drum, registered a surprising pang. He observed their meager possessions, a few woven blankets, some clay pots, a worn deerskin pouch. Their desperation was palpable. So you just moved in, he grunted, attempting to project authority. Nanyehi met his gaze unflinchingly. We found it empty. It was so cold. We thought, maybe it was abandoned. Her steady eyes, however, held a profound plea. Please, sir. Just for a little while. Until we can find our people, or a new place. Elias stepped deeper into the room, his heavy boots thudding softly on the packed earth. He stopped by the hearth, a small fire crackling, valiantly battling the chill. The air was warm, smelling of wood smoke and, again, that unfamiliar sweetness. He noticed the intricate beadwork on one blanket, the delicate carving of a small wooden bird clutched by a timid girl. This was more than just a temporary shelter, it was a sanctuary. This ain't just a little while place, girls, he said, turning to face them. Fear flickered in their eyes, shoulders slumped in resignation. A strange tightness gripped his chest. A mountain man, a loner, accustomed to the wilderness's vast silence, he felt an unexpected pull. A responsibility. A warmth that transcended the fire. He cleared his throat. This is my home. I bought it. Worked years for it. He let the words settle. Their faces fell further. Then, he looked at Nanyehi again, her eyes wide with a desperate hope he couldn't ignore. But, he continued, a slow smile unfurling across his weathered face, I reckon a man needs a family for a home to truly feel right, doesn't he? A collective gasp, then a tide of understanding and disbelief washed over their faces. Timid smiles, then beaming grins, ignited the cabin like sunrise. Nanyehi's eyes, bright with unshed tears, were the first to truly grasp his meaning. You mean, Elias chuckled, a sound rarely heard. I mean, if you girls are gonna live here, you best start thinking about what we're gonna have for supper. And no more of this Mr. Business. It's Elias. He watched as they erupted into joyful whispers, relief flooding their expressions. The cabin, once a silent refuge, now brimmed with life, a promise of a future he hadn't dared to imagine. It was no longer just a shack, it was, unmistakably, a home.